Hey guys, this is Jordan from Worship Online, and today I'm going to be giving you an overview of my updated rig at the moment. Changed things up a little bit over the past year, and I'm now using a Fractal. I know no amps. Haven't even actually really plugged in an amp much at all in the past year. So I'm going to give you an overview of that, how I'm using it, why, and also the different pedals that I've added in conjunction with the Fractal to make that setup work for me. So everybody does things differently, and there's no right or wrong way to do worship guitar, just different things. And I have my ways that I really like when it comes to approaching just different effects and delays and overdrives, how dirty you make the amp, whatever it is. But I just want to let you guys know that this isn't the Bible for creating worship tone or anything like that. Just be you. Maybe you'll learn a few tricks or tips and whatnot, and maybe it'll inspire you to check out Fractal. If not, no worries, but this has really worked for me. But yeah, let's start off talking about this guy. So I've been using this a lot over the past year. It's been a really great guitar. I found it last year. I was watching a live video of this pop artist playing, and the guitarist was using one of those. I was like, what is that guitar? I gotta check that out. So my research, found it, and really loved the approach to it. It's an Ernie Ball Valentine. Didn't mention that earlier. And this is the Tremolo Model. I know a lot of people don't play Music Mans in worship, but they get kind of a bad rap because they're associated with a lot of shredders and whatnot. But this is actually a really flexible build, and it's done by James Valentine in Marine 5, and he's been a really inspiring guitarist to me, and I love his approach on tone and playing, and turns out the way he designed this is actually in line with a lot of the ways that I love to approach guitar. And in worship, and especially in touring and certain things, you really can only use one guitar in certain contexts, or it's just more practical that way. So having a really flexible guitar is really important to me, and being able to dial in a variety of tones. So that's kind of how he ended up designing this. He used 335s a lot, which I have a 355 that I've used a lot over the years, which is a much more dark guitar compared to a lot of Fenders. And he also uses a lot of teles. So when it comes to these pickups and the options that they designed for this, this is more of like a 335 humbucking style pickup, and this is more of a tele style bridge pickup. And so you have a lot of flexibility there, but on top of that, you also have a coil tap by simply just pushing the buttons down. And so that'll do a coil tap, if that's the technical correct term, coil split, whatever it is. Anyways, it turns it into a single coil pickup in the neck by hitting the tone pot. And then also with the volume pot, by pushing that, you get a volume boost. And so that's an active volume boost of 20 dB, which has been really helpful to me. I didn't know if I was going to use that much when I got this guitar, but I actually have been using it quite a decent amount. And where that's been helpful has been more in my clean tones, or simply just looking for more sustain. So I'll set my overdrives at lower gain if I really need to push it to the next level and get a little bit more sustain. I'll push that, and it'll push my drives a little bit harder and push my compressor at the front of my board a bit harder. So everything will compress and sustain more. But sometimes clean tones can kind of get lost in the mix a lot of times, and even when bands full in. And so having that boost there with a clean tone actually will just allow me to position myself in the mix a little bit better while still keeping things relatively clean. And that's all dependent on how you set up your amp and gain staging and whatnot. But yeah, that's been a really handy feature. Another nice thing about this guitar regarding its electronics is that it has a special silent circuitry circuit for canceling out the hum of the single coils. And so there's a battery in the back that you can replace and can go out, but it doesn't cause any failure or anything like that. It'll just cause more single coil noise to come back at it. But it's a relatively almost noiseless and quiet guitar for the single coil modes, which has been phenomenal because I hate single coil noise. My Jazzmaster is pretty noisy, even with shielding underneath and whatnot. So playing live and even in the studio, having that has been really vital to me. And it's one of the reasons why I've just continually stuck to this guitar. And I'm not endorsed by them in any way or anything like that. I just love their product and decided to buy it because I really love the specs and I really love the approach to it. It's really unique. It has locking tuners, has a compensated nut for better intonation. The intonation across the fretboard is amazing. It has an unfinished neck even. You have to use a special gun wax or gun oil on the back once a year to finish it or keep it conditioned well. But yeah, it's super smooth. Hand never gets stuck along the way, which can happen with a lot of Gibsons, or at least that's one of the downsides for me playing my Gibson, is that the glossy neck can get pretty sticky and miss notes sometimes, unfortunately. But this has just been overall a great player's guitar, and it's really flexible with its tone options. But let's check out some of that. So here's kind of like the neck humbucking sound. Then if I coil tap that, and then yeah, it's got the middle pickup position, which I haven't used a whole lot of. And you can coil tap that too. It's all really subtle, but it's kind of, you're really choosing kind of how smooth you want your tone to be. I'm constantly rolling tone off throughout a set to change how I sit in the mix. And so another way of approaching that is just like, oh, well, I want this to be bright and shimmery and, you know, like single coils or humbuckers. It's just a little bit warmer sounding. And so that's kind of how I'm making those choices. Bridge pickup's great though. Not as fat as a humbucker, and sometimes I miss that, and so that's when I'll use a different guitar if I really want a fat, mid-rangey, warm bridge pickup sound. I'll grab my Gibson for something like that, but overall, it's been really fantastic. But that's my guitar that I've been using for the past year or so. So let's take a look at my pedal board. First and foremost, let's talk about the pedals, and then we'll get to the Fractal in a second. Because I changed up a few things here, mainly with the overdrives. So I've had the OD820 for years. In all the Tube Screamer models I've played, I've kind of just always loved this one. It just, it's really smooth, doesn't get harsh, just sounds very organic to me. But I use this first and foremost in my chain for that more mid-rangey type drive. I keep the gain levels between my two drives relatively similar, and I choose them more from an EQ standpoint. So traditionally, Tube Screamers are more rolled off in the high highs and the low end as well. So it cuts through more in the mid-range. And so that can sound really great with the bridge pickup. It can sound great with the neck pickup as well. It's just, usually I'm probably stepping on that more when I'm doing a big driven part with the bridge pickup. But I keep that front of my chain because having a pedal that rolls off the low end earlier on in the gain staging tightens things up more. If you're putting like a really bass heavy overdrive up front, it can get a little bit more flabby in the low end. That's just a little bit of a trick for tightening up your low end if you feel like yours is just getting too loose. But yeah, so that's my first overdrive in the chain. And then I also just recently got the Breakers overdrive. So I really loved the Del Mar. Matt Podessa was kind enough to let me borrow his for a couple years. And I loved how the EQ was pretty, I don't know, shimmery for lack of a better word in the high end. It was a pretty brilliant EQ. And in the switching, it's two different modes. The top mode is more Tube Screamer-like and compressed. The bottom mode is less compressed and more open. I like having that option because Tube Screamer, like this OD820, is going to be a bit more compressed, so having the flexibility of that is nice, and that's one of the reasons why I really like the Del Mar. So when Bondi, however you say it, came out with the breakers to replace the Delmar, I wanted to give it a shot. And honestly, sounds very similar to Delmar. I might do a comparison with Matt's Delmar, especially because they're selling for like thousands of dollars now, just for fun. But it's been a great pedal. I don't miss using the Delmar at all, but it's been great. So I'll run that in the more open setting. And the one thing about the breakers that's different from the Delmar is the gain. The Delmar was way more gain heavy, and I would run that at like 10 o'clock. Here, to get a similar tone, I run it at like, I don't know, is that 2 o'clock or something like that? So it's a lot lighter on the gain. And so you kind of have to just compensate there if you're comparing those two pedals. But here's kind of the difference between the two of those. Just playing with my bridge pickup here. Clean. And together. And if I even wanted to boost it. A little sloppy playing there, but you get the point. You get a lot more sustain out of it when you start stacking things. Sometimes stacking can sound great, sometimes it can sound terrible. I don't know, it all kind of depends on the season for me. But yeah, you can kind of hear there a little bit that Tube Screamer is a little bit more warm, a little less low end, and the other one I'm using a lot more with a neck pickup for kind of like a cleaner, brighter sound, or more scooped is a way to put it. So another pedal that I added recently that is different from kind of last year was the Pog 2. I had it laying around. I've had this pedal for a while, but it had some unique features on it that are a little bit different than what Fractal had built into the X8. And so I decided to put it back on. I had great tracking. I put it before my drives rather than after them, just for a little bit cleaner tracking. And other times I put it afterwards, just for a little bit more vibe. Just try things out, see what works for you. All kind of depends on how you use it. But I have three main sounds that I'm using. The first one is just an octave down. And I'll use that for a lot of big leads just to add more beef to it. And then I have a second preset where the dry signal is filtered out and there's just an octave up and a second octave up added as well. But the low pass filter feature on the Pog 2 is really nice because it can filter out the harsh highs. And it sounds something like this. So another way I'll use that is with a reverse reverb. I always love to change things up and just have the flexibility of different sounds and mess around when combining them. I'll throw like a rotary on and it can sound something like this. So you get some really nice textural elements. I'll do that in the studio a lot. It's a great little vibe and trick to do in verses to kind of fill in the space when the song isn't fully in, or just in flow moments in church. I'll do that a lot. And then I have this third preset, which is kind of like a swell sound. If it's like fully dry, it sounds like this. And so the attack feature on the Pog 2 is really nice for doing that. There's a little bit of detune added to it, sorry. And adding even more effects to that, let's like throw a vibrato on it and like a big reverb. So I'll use that for kind of like a pulsing effect, which I'm doing in Carrie's version of In the Name of Love. That we covered at Spotify. So I kind of put this back on the board just for that flexibility and those options. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about using the Fractal. So one of the reasons why I love using modeling now is that I have access to so many different types of amps. And Fractal has a great library of different amp models, all these vintage Fenders, you got Matchless and Vox in there, you got everything. Dumbles, like obscure, different vibes. I think it's a Dumble, don't quote me on that. But anyways, I'm using actually Keith Urban's vintage Fender Tweed twin that has actually been really great for me so far. I've tried many different models. I've tried the other twins, deluxes. I love Fender amps, so I kind of gravitate towards those. But lately I decided to try it out because it was in there, and I've loved it so far. It doesn't really get too harsh. It has a little bit more low end and warmth to it than a typical twin reverb does. But yeah, just trying that out right now. Might change it in a month, who knows, but right now it's been really great. I'm using that with a stereo cab, and that has the Tweed twin cab on the left, and then I have a deluxe cab on the right with a 57 on it. And that creates a little bit more stereo width to it. It's one of the nice features of the Fractal. But the one downside about the AX8 in particular is I can only run a mono amp. So you can't do like a twin reverb over here and a DC30 on the other side. But I actually kind of like that because in my ears, it helps keep my guitar up the center if I prefer it to, and it gives me a cleaner in-ear mix. And I've just had to get used to that. If I want a little bit more width, I'll step on the enhancer for a little bit more stereo spread. But I haven't really missed running stereo amps very much. And it creates a really consistent tone for each side of the room in the congregation or audience to be able to get the same exact tone from me for the most part, even though they're hearing different cabs on left and right. Because in the room, you're not really hearing a lot of the stereo effects that a lot of guitarists think people are hearing out there. It's really only the people in the center of the room. If you're sitting off to the left of your congregation, or if your church is using a mono PA even, which happens a lot, you're really only hearing like that left side of your delay signal or reverb or whatever stereo signal you're sending them over there. If you have a Vox over here and a twin reverb over here, if the front of house engineer is panning them hard left and right, that side of the congregation is really only hearing your Vox. So I like to make sure that both sides of the room are really getting a consistent tone for me. So I don't really miss that too much. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the effects. I talk about this a little bit more in the masterclass videos, which you guys can check out on Worship Online, where me and Matt Podesta go through our rigs a bit more. I'm just going to focus on a little bit some of the updates that I did. I have 3 delay patches, so 6 different settings with the X and Y modes. You can hold down the foot switch and access a second preset for that particular sound. And so I added a triplet delay recently. And I got really inspired by that by Interpol on this classic song called Untitled by theirs, I believe. And it has this opening guitar riff that has this big triplet delay, and it was really unique rhythm. I love the triplet feel in a lot of modern music, and just felt like it was an alternate vibe to bring into worship music, because it's usually very dotted eighth note delay heavy, which comes from like the U2 and Coldplay background and whatnot. So I'm always trying to explore new territories, new sounds, new vibes to incorporate into worship, because a lot of people can feel like they need to do this particular sound, which isn't necessarily true. You can put on a standard eighth note setting, which I have right here, and get away with that the entire song, pretty much any song. You don't have to have this extremely specific delay setting in order to play a particular song on Sunday. So yeah, just encourage you guys in that. Feel free to explore different delay sounds, different reverb sounds. A lot of times I don't use any delay at all. Lately I've just been using like this big reverb setting with no delay for like big lead parts. If I'm doing something like that, maybe something like this. yeah, so it's just a different sound, a different texture. I love reverb. I'm probably switching reverb settings more so than delay settings a lot of times. But yeah, don't feel like you have to have a particular sound on 24/7 in order to sound good for it to be appropriate in a worship context or anything like that. Explore new territory, explore new sounds. I'm constantly changing things on here and trying to do different vibes. I have 2 different levels of 1/8 note delays here. I have a dot to 1/8 stereo setting here with another 1/8 note or quarter note, I can't remember. And I'm really only using that if an artist or producer really needs it. I have a super heavy pattern delay here. And that just has a really long trail to it and it just pans all over the place. I'm using that more of a textural thing when I'm vibing a lot of times in down moments and flow moments. I'm using a lot of vibrato a lot of times to add more textural elements. There's a chorus, which I'm really only using on like low string parts. I'm not really using that in like kind of the funky palm muted sense as much anymore. I feel like that sounds kind of moving on its way out. But yeah, I'm kind of always trying to be in tune with the way other guitarists in all sorts of different genres are approaching things and using effects in different ways. Something like chorus can be used in a million different contexts and it can just generate different feelings depending on where you're playing on the neck, what chords you associate with, where you're playing with a lead, whether you're playing it rhythmically. And so I'm trying to always challenge myself in those areas. Another thing that I changed up since the masterclass videos that we did last year is this formant filter, which is pretty cool. It generates certain resonant frequencies, which is kind of more mid-rangey feeling. That's kind of based on a lot of vowel sounds to create a really just filtered effect. So you could do something cool like this. And so just dry signal to give you a taste of what that's like on and off. So you could do that with like a cool reverse reverb. I'm always trying to combine random effects. Yeah, so it's just different thing to try out, combine with other things and create new textures, create new sounds. A lot of times I've been experimenting more with spring reverb. I changed that up recently. I have this kind of like shorter reverb setting that I'm always changing, whether it's a small room, plate, spring, and there's just a lot of guitar parts I've listened to that have that kind of rattling sound in the spring that's just been really vibey to me, and so I've kind of resorted back to that. And in the studio a lot, I'll just turn up the decay and mix. Yeah, I love the sound of the spring rattle in there. Just adds a lot of character to it. So I've been doing that a lot lately, especially in the studio and messing around with that live. A lot of things in worship, people kind of gravitate towards the big washy sounds, which I have lots of presets for that, but I'm always trying to experiment with more kind of shorter reverb and delay sounds to just give a different texture. But yeah, that really sums up a lot of the updates that I've done to my pedal board. In general, with the Fractal, you know, I just haven't really missed using real amps. I have barely plugged into an amp over the past almost a year now, and just because it sounds so amazing. When I first got my Fractal, I did an A/B test with one of my deluxes in the other room, mic'd up like I normally would, and recorded it through a looper and compared that to Fractal's models. And when I checked it out, when I was recording it, I thought the the Fractal setting was the real amp, because I was like, oh, that sounds so much better. I was actually blown away by the fact that it could actually improve things. Because you have so much flexibility, you can choose from millions of cabs, and you can purchase all these cabs online. And the cabs really influence the tone, probably more so than the amp model, in my opinion. But you have so many options, and so it's a lot easier to narrow in on the sound that you hear in your head and what you want to hear. So being able to try out so many different amps and cabs and effects settings, it's a lot easier to just find what you like. But yeah, and also having the flexibility to just be able to reach over and change the bass and then treble depending on what guitar you're using, or changing the output level for the monitor front of house engineers depending on what they need, or in a studio or anything like that. There's just so much flexibility there. It's built like a tank. But yeah, it's just been a great option for me in so many different settings and contexts, whether it's a studio, whether that's flying to a conference, or whether that's just playing in church on Sunday. I haven't missed using amps one bit. Like I've said before, I'm not endorsed by them or any of the companies that I've mentioned today. Just as kind of a disclaimer, I just believe in these products. They work really well for me. Everybody has different tastes. Everybody has different approaches to tone. So feel free to do what's you, be yourself, go in your own lane, find what works best for you and what inspires you most importantly. But yeah, a lot of people wonder, like, why haven't you gone with the Helix and different things? Because so many guys are using that now. And I don't know, I have my different reasons for it. I think this sounds better in comparison when I've tried out the other models, but who knows? I could be fully convinced if someone was willing to show me that, and there's probably some flexibility that Helix has to offer that Fractal doesn't, and vice versa with Fractal. So just do your research, take this all with a grain of salt, and try things out. The more effects that you try, the more amps that you try, the more amp modeling options that you try, the more you'll develop an ear for what works for you and what works in the context of your church and the context of your playing. So that sums everything up. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. You've learned something, maybe inspired a little bit, or yeah, just feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Shoot me a message on Instagram or at Worship Online. Send us an email. Mention us in the comments how you're approaching things and what has worked for you. And feel free to check out our masterclass videos that I've done with Matt Badessa, where we've gone through our effects and just different tonal aspects in more detail. But yeah, thanks for watching.